Hi all, Crystar is an old game. It was released in 2018 for PlayStation 4, and we had to wait another 4 years until it was released on Nintendo Switch. The game can be described as a 3-dimensional action RPG, where you fight hordes of monsters to save your sister. In this review I discuss basic aspects of the game and how it's perceived on the Nintendo Switch. I received a review copy of this game and could potentially contain spoilers. Please subscribe to my channel, I upload new reviews every week. And now, let's take a closer look at Crystar. This game addresses heavy topics like losing a close friend or mourning the deceased. In addition, moral issues are discussed about how far one is willing to go to achieve one's goal. Can you kill someone to save someone else? It's a rather dark and dramatic game about Rei's longing to meet her lost sister Mirai. They have ended up in an odd place called Purgatory. Suddenly, they meet the evil demon Amnesis, who makes sure that Rei's sister faces a certain death. But there is a chance to revive her. Rei signs a contract with 2 demons. This gives her a chance to meet her sister again, but at the expense of her becoming the demon's slave or executor. During the course of the game you meet different characters who all have a gloomy background, but their stories can be quite interesting. Among other things, everyone's fate is explained in cutscenes, but also through various dialogues. Unfortunately, some conversations are completely unbearable and can sometimes be perceived as meaningless chatting. But the story as a whole is quite exciting. What will happen to Rei and Mirai? Who is the mysterious Amnesis? And what is the purpose of the 2 demons that makes Rei do what they want? Questions I don't intend to answer here, no spoilers. Get used to running around in narrow corridors and whipping up imaginative creatures. This is one of the game's first courses, and this is one of the later courses. Yeah, apart from the graphics, the principle is the same. Get through a maze and reach the end, and do it for as long as the game lasts. About 30 to 35 hours, depend on how you play. It's a pretty monotonous experience, because you basically do the same thing all the time. However, there are things that make it more interesting. For example, to test different degrees of difficulty, you can choose between easy, normal and hard. I usually play in normal mode, which feels like a nice challenge. You risk getting hurt if you're not careful, so it's important to be observant. Avoid attacks and use your reflexes to read your opponents. The game's main enemies consists of ghosts, flying monsters, charging enemies, dogs, flowers, and this one. I don't even know what it is, but it has a ranged attack that can be good to avoid. To be honest, I would have liked a greater variety, more monsters with new mechanics. However, there are a couple of super mobs that can be worth killing. They can be really dangerous and you have to be careful. If you're hit, they can damage you properly. Therefore, it's important to know how your characters work, what skills you have, and when to use dash to get to safe ground. It's quite fun to fight actually, despite the small selection of enemies. At first you can only play as Rei. She uses her swords to fight, but she has a couple of skills that make her much stronger. Among other things, she has an AoE attack that does damage and interrupts the enemy's attacks. This is extremely useful, especially if you encounter many enemies at once. Over time you unlock new characters with new abilities. Besides Rei, I mostly used Na. She uses ranged magic and is useful if you encounter enemies that are dangerous in close combat. The distance saves one from getting hurt. Each character has a lot of skills that can be fun to try. In this way, you can experiment and try to figure out what suits you the best. This is good. The game has a level up system. This can prove to be very necessary, especially if you face tougher enemies. If you're low level, the enemies take less damage, which means that the fights take longer. There is also a risk that you will be knocked down, because your health pool is smaller. It's possible to reduce the level of difficulty, but how fun is that? It takes away the tension. It's possible to find new equipment, but the way to get new weapons and armor is rather complicated, convoluted to say the least. Instead of finding weapons by eliminating enemies, there is a unique system. If you kill a super mob, you will get a torment. After a completed course, you can cry and release the torment that now turns into a sentiment. Sentiments are different weapons and armor that can then be combined or modified to create stronger weapons. One question, why is this so complicated? Sure, it's quite fun to combine to get better weapons, but the way you do it is probably the most complicated I have ever experienced. Anyway, it's different, but somewhat confusing. The game has a number of bosses. These are really cool actually, especially since you meet lots of trash mobs and suddenly you're face to face with a terrifying boss. They were not very difficult to eliminate, especially if you play in normal mode, but they may have unique mechanics that differ from anything else you've done before. This boss is probably my favorite. It spawns 2 ads and makes a solid charge attack. If you stand in the way, you risk taking a lot of damage. It's important to be concentrated. I like it. The graphics are seen from a 3-dimensional perspective and I perceive it as rather monotonous. You discover different worlds that have their own unique coloring, but that's kind of what's interesting. The layout of the courses is basically the same throughout the game. Even the environments are the same. Different houses, a giant sword, narrow roads and backgrounds that follow throughout the game. In principle, only the colors change. It makes it feel fresh, but at the same time I would have liked to see a greater variety of environments. Crystar is a comprehensive game that contains lots of action, dialogues and character development. Personally, I thought it was most fun to get new weapons and to meet all the unique bosses. In addition, the narrative is interesting, it's exciting to see what will happen, but it's a long game. Especially if you decide to eliminate all enemies you encounter, then this will be an extremely grind-heavy experience. However, you can run past the enemies. Your speed is really high in this game, and you can run away from your opponents without any problems. The game works well on Nintendo Switch. I never experienced that the game crashed or that it suffered from low frame rate, and if there were problems with the frame rate, it was hardly noticed. I recommend Crystar, especially if you like action RPG with lots of dialogues and cutscenes. Feel free to subscribe to my channel, it helps me a lot. Have a good day, see ya!